Landlord threatens my 4-year-old son with homelessness. Hey everyone at our entitled people. I've got a story that doesn't have a happy ending or a lesson in forgiveness. This one's about a landlord who crossed every conceivable line. And I hope sharing this serves as a cautionary tale for others. A few months back, I was renting an apartment for me and my 4-year-old son, Jack. Times have been tough financially, and I had fallen behind on rent. I'd informed my landlord, Mr. Smith, of my situation and was in the process of negotiating a payment plan. One afternoon, Mr. Smith shows up at my door, unannounced. He doesn't ask about the rent or try to discuss the issue. Instead, he sees my son playing with his toys in the living room and says, "You know, if you don't pay up, not only will you be on the streets, but your son will be too." I was in complete disbelief. Threatening an adult with eviction is one thing, but bringing a 4-year-old child into it? That's just heartless. The worst part is, Mr. Smith seemed to take a twisted pleasure in saying it, as if the idea of putting a child out on the streets was somehow satisfying to him. I managed to scrape together the money to pay the rent, primarily because I was concerned for my son's well-being. However, the incident has left a permanent scar on me. I'm now in the process of finding a new place and reporting Mr. Smith to the local housing authorities, although I don't know how much that will achieve. I feel like you are twisting things for sympathy. The title makes it seem like your landlord actually threatened your child. But he didn't. He merely told you what would happen if you did not pay the rent you have to pay. When being told the legal consequences of not paying rent is threatening a 4-year-old. Reporting your landlord to the housing authority because he expects you to abide by your rental contract and pay your rent? You highlighting yourself as an entitled person. This is a joke, right? The landlord is expecting to be paid because you have a contract lease that says you will pay him. It is not entitled to expect to be paid for leased housing. This is his actual job. WTF. Yeah, I don't think you're going to get sympathy here. While it sounds fucking heartless, it is the blunt truth, sadly. It's sort of a reality check that if you don't pay your rent, you not only will be homeless but so will your son. It sort of was a mindset of reminding you what's at stake. Oh, so you wrote a post about your own entitled self? That's a new one for this sub. Yeah, I don't think the entitlement is one-sided here. He didn't threaten your child. He told you a fact. I'm sure times are tough and I feel for you. But a contract is a contract, and if you're not paying the bills, your landlord is. Gotta find a way to pay your rent. He's not the entitled one, you are. He wasn't even speaking to your kid. LMAO, you're the entitled one. 100. Face with monocle, face with monocle, face with monocle. Your landlord expects you to live up to your side of the agreement. Nobody should put a 4-year-old into an argument. But still, how is the landlord the entitled one? Telling you the harsh truth isn't entitlement. You didn't pay your rent, then got upset that your landlord said you could get evicted? Imagine being so entitled that you think you can live in someone else's property without paying. When you signed a contract that said you would pay and expect the property owner to be super cool about it, and then go so far as to think that the property owner is an entitled asshole for mentioning that you aren't meeting your contractual obligations and the consequences your own failures on your family. I wish this was on Am I the Asshole so I could say you're the asshole to the op. Your son is an extension of you. If you don't figure it the fuck out, then he'll be homeless just like you. There's nothing incorrect about that statement. Sounds like you weren't taking the rent issue very seriously. Your landlord reminded you of the consequences of non-payment. Seems this worked. So, you didn't pay rent and your landlord reminded you that you weren't the only one who would be out on the street if you didn't sort it out? Sure, your landlord is the entitled one. By not keeping up with your rent, you put your child at risk of homelessness. Your landlord has taxes to pay and his own bills. Maybe he shouldn't speak about that in front of your kid, but maybe you should pay your bills and quit expecting your landlord to bend backwards for you with payment plans. You've got a child to care for. Focus on that and not whining on Reddit about how mean your landlord is because he gasps wants you to pay your bills on time. You sound far more entitled than the landlord. Your landlord is not TGE entitled one here. You are. And in no way did he threaten your son. There is nothing to report about the landlord either. Pay your rent. You're entitled thing, you can stay there and not pay rent. He is telling you the truth, both of you will be homeless. From the title I thought he'd said it to your son, which would have been very out of order. The kettle calling the pot black. You're gonna report your landlord for what? Expecting to be paid on time? Phew, what a bad man. I don't see why you are so hurt by this. It didn't need to be said. But also, he wasn't incorrect. And he sure as hell didn't break any laws or anything, so chill. He said more than he needed to and it wasn't cool. But he's not all that wrong. You were behind on rent, and if you get behind enough, you will be evicted. That's life. I managed to scrape together the money to pay the rent, primarily because I was concerned for my son's well-being. I'm now in the process of finding a new place. Sounds like a happy ending to me. And I'm sure that now you have paid what you owe your soon-to-be ex-landlord will forgive your entitlement. The landlord didn't threaten your son with eviction. You didn't pay your rent, he simply reminded you of what the consequences of your own actions would be. He didn't threaten to 4YearOld. He told you the consequences of not paying. You're just twisting the reality. It's up to you to pay your rent on time, not up to the landlord to financially support you. Are you sure you have the correct definition of entitled? Why are you posting like you and your son are the victims here? You are the perpetrator of your own predicament. And your son is your victim. The landlord is just giving you a reality check. You need to step up and own your situation. It is of your own making. You have a lease. It requires you to pay rent. It is not optional. If you don't pay, you can't live there. Holy hyperbole. How does his making a factual, albeit slightly gross comment that the kid was probably blissfully unaware of translate to crossing every conceivable line that has left a permanent scar? The landlord probably has a family of his own and relies on the rental income to pay bills. You are the entitled one, and if you're not conscientious about that, you'll be raising another entitled human. Time to look at yourself in the mirror and take a good look at the entitled victim you portray. You had the money, or were able to get it. You just don't think you should have had to. Then you play the victim. Buddy, times are tough for all. Don't make excuses and pay your bills in time. No one will fuck with you. Don't pay and be on the street with all your children. It's very simple. No one owe you nothing. Only you owe the rent. Good luck out there. Sounds like he lit the fire for you to get your rent paid. But that's the cold hard truth. Either pay rent or you and your son will be homeless. The cautionary tale is to never be a landlord. Too many entitled tenants today. I was expecting a good EP story and now I'm just disappointed. You sound kind of like a snowflake. He was trying to get what you owe him. He's your landlord and you're part of an income he brings in. What are you going to report him for exactly? Expecting you to uphold the lease you signed? Do you think you can live on his dime because you have a kid? Keep telling yourself whatever you need to, dude. You're still about half full of shit though. Did you think he'd just let you not pay rent? He has to make a living also. You put yourself in this position. He doesn't need to do anything but remind you to pay your rent. You're technically the only threatening your kid by not paying rent and leaving him potentially homeless. Pay your FKN rent. He didn't threaten your kid. He was talking to you. Heartless maybe, but I wouldn't say entitled. Not in the sense of this sub. I mean the landlord is entitled to the renter paying rent on time. But that's what the renter agreed to do. I'm sure because the interaction was cold and likely not a welcomed one. He may have seemed to enjoy the threat, but that could just be a biased perception. Didn't you post 2 months ago about how your house was bombarded by biplane-released bowling balls from the local millionaire after you blackened his eye? So do you rent or do you own a house, bowling ally? I'm confused how he threatened your child. He told you the truth. The entitled person here seems to be you, as you just expected him to shrug it off that you weren't paying rent. I'm not even going to start on my thoughts about most landlords. But if you choose to rent from someone and sign a contract, you don't get to cry entitled when they expect you to uphold your end of the contract. That wasn't a very nice thing to say, but I don't think it was crossing a line. It's not like he said to your son that he will be homeless or threatened him personally. He just made you aware that he will indeed evict you and your young son if you don't pay the rent on time. So is the entitled person in this story the OP? That is weird. Most people don't really post it themselves here. Like the landlord was rude, but it seemed like you were a couple of months behind on rent. Having a child is not a free pass, and the landlord saying think about your child and pay the money on time is not entitled or a threat. Landlords talk, and your actions will make it very hard to find places from other landlords in your area. Take the L of not paying rent and try to improve. Trying to disrupt a person's income because you felt disrespected is a great way to ensure there is no places for rent for the next 20 miles. I mean, he might have been rude about it, but he was stating fact. Rude is no reason to report him to the housing authority. Did you expect that your son would stay if you were evicted? Of course not. A landlord asking for his rent is not entitled. A tenant not paying up and expecting no repercussions is entitled. I think you need to realize who the entitled one is here. Ding dong, landlord here. Sorry, but you are the entitled one here. While I agree that the landlord shouldn't have said that around your son, you do have to pay rent, so I don't think reporting him will do anything. Why does this read like it was written by ChatGPT? A landlord asking for rent to be paid is entitled? Lol. Okay. Being a parent doesn't make you entitled to free housing. Babe, you're dumb. Lol. He's just telling the truth. Landlord ain't gonna adopt your kid. BC, you can't pay your FC King rent. What if you not paying your rent is causing his family financial hardship? If he depends on your rent being paid on time, you could be putting his wife and kids in a tough spot by being late. He didn't have to threaten your son being on the streets, but he has obligations too. Just pay your rent. Everyone knows landlords suck, but if you manage to scrape the money together, it sounds like you were spending your money on other things and could have just paid. Coming from a fellow mom, when you and your child are at the mercy of renting, rent better be your first damn priority. He is right, and you clearly needed that reality check. There is no landlord on earth who is going to care about your kid enough for you to fall far back enough on rent to get evicted. They will always care about your money becoming theirs because you live in their house. The landlord actually is entitled to your rent on time. Woman shrugging, light skin tone. Seems like you're the actual EP here. I'm sorry, what the fuck is wrong with people here? Speaking as a landlord, I always make sure those types of situations are discussed privately. It's hard enough for people to make rent, sometimes worse still to shame people in front of their family. Now, I don't think he threatened your kid specifically, but what he did was still out of line. Post doesn't match profile. The only entitled person on this is the OP, as he thinks he should live rent-free. Since when is a statement of facts wrong? You don't pay your rent, and you will end up on the streets. I fail to see how that is a threat, as it is a fact for anyone. I know times are tough, but paying your rent is necessary. All Smitty did was spit facts. Pay your damn rent. No one owes you free rent because you didn't know how birth control works. Sweetheart. By reminding you of this, you did manage to pay what you owed. Here we go again, another story of woe is me. Let's bash the landlords. Here's a newsflash: most landlords are not rich, they are not well off. They are people who simply have an extra place that they can rent, and they depend on that money to pay for their bills. So you, by not paying your rent on time, have F up another person's whole life potentially. He's not your friend, he's not your family, he is your landlord, and this is simply business. Take your personal feelings out of it. In the future, you can avoid the landlord coming to your home and saying low blows to your kid by paying the rent on time. Problem solved. You are the entitled person. Lol. Some women birth a child and expect the world to revolve around them. So you consider your landlord entitled to tell you that you will be evicted if you don't start paying your rent on time? He doesn't actually owe you free housing because you have a child. Entitled is thinking he does. Pay your rent on time. It's about owning up to your responsibility. Report him if you like. Speech is no crime, so he broke now law, and you will not be able to prove he said it either. So move on. Op, you are the entitled one, not the LL. But it was OP who was entitled all along. Good God, Op. I'm embarrassed for you. The landlord probably brought up Op's son because he knows that if he has to start the eviction process, the result would be putting a kid in the street. Nobody wants to have to do that, especially because entitled parents often think having children should preclude them from natural consequences of their actions. If the landlord is paying a mortgage, not receiving rent puts his family at risk of being out on the street too. Op, call 211 if in the US and ask for resources to help with making rent. A lot of towns, cities have human services departments that will help as well. Landlord says that my son and I will be homeless if I don't pay the rent. There. Fixed it. Reporting him for what? Guys, this is a troll story made to drive engagement. Notice how OP hasn't responded. So your landlord wanted his money. Told you what the consequences of not giving him the money. And you gave him the money. Sounds like you didn't want to pay rent. He did not threaten your son with homelessness. You did. Pay your debts. On a completely different note, I followed Dave Ramsey's plan. I have a stack of copies of the Total Money Makeover in my office that I hand out to people who come to me and have financial issues. If you want to change your life around, that would be an excellent start. Is everyone in this sub a landlord? The bootlicking is real. There are some people who get off on doing stuff like this. Now that I'm older and don't give a fuck, I love to mess with them. But they do exist, and they are assholes. All these people in here defending landlords is wow. I think both OP and the landlord are entitled. OP for thinking they should be entitled to free rent, and the landlord for being a landlord. Owning houses to rent to other people for astronomical amounts just because you can is icky. And shouldn't be your main source of income. I mean, the landlord is a bit of a callous prick, but that's pretty much in the job description, TBF. Both adults were out of line, putting an innocent 4-year-old in the middle of their dispute. All landlords are parasites. Most of these comments are written by people who read 2 words of the story. Don't open your mouth if nothing smart can come out of it. Gonna ruffle some feathers with this one, but all landlords are entitled bitches, PEROID. Even if the op is also on the entitled side, the landlord will always be worse. You cannot change my mind. Unfortunate number of bootlickers here. Unfortunately, some people lack the respect and decency of little ears around. If my 4-year-old heard that, I wouldn't hear the end of all the questions and most likely fear of being homeless. She would have also told anyone and everyone she could talk to out in public. That was definitely a conversation for adult ears only, or use the words eviction because most toddlers don't know what it means. I've said it once. I'll say it again, not my phrase. Tenants supply housing the same way scalpers supply concert tickets. Some people look upon innocence and see punishment. That's why mommy's here to protect. Lol, she thought she was highlighting the landlord as the entitled person. Lil, did she know she's the one who is entitled? He thought this was gonna pan out way differently. There will always be people who prey on the weak. Cut your losses, find another apartment and leave. He's not gonna stop now that he knows your financial situation. Few people serve little purpose to society than landlords. Landlords be like, pay me loads of money regularly to live on my land, and I might not ruin your life. So basically you had the rent money all along but thought you could shirk your responsibilities as a grown adult. And you're blaming others for your poor decision making? Single moms, women hate personal accountability. If you report him, I wouldn't expect to use him as a reference for your next place, which some places do ask for. While what he said was harsh, it wasn't illegal. And your son didn't hear it or understand it, so you wanting to hurt another man's livelihood cause you got your feelings hurt is BS. You know, if you don't pay up, not only will you be on the streets, but your son will be too. I managed to scrape together the money to pay the rent, primarily because I was concerned for my son's well-being. I'd say his mission was at go. He was pointing out a fact, albeit an obvious one, not threatening a 4YearOld.